A very warm welcome, Professor Shah and fellow classmates. My name is Clement and I'm from Team 1 alongside my group mates Giles, Alvin, Gladwin, and Sui Ling. So today we'll be touching on the topic on a review of Bluetooth security in Internet of Things. And in this presentation, we will be covering the topics as shown in the slide by myself and my group mates. So starting off, I'll be giving a simple explanation of what is an IoT, a short acronym for the Internet of Things, which is a system of interrelated computing devices with the ability to transfer data over a network without requiring human-to-human or human-to-computer interaction. So they can be put in three categories as shown in the slides. And as we know today, we have many digital devices as part of our daily lives. And many of these devices uses Bluetooth connection to connect with one another. And some examples include like our smartwatch, speaker, vacuum robots, wireless mouse, and earphones, where they can be further segregated into IoT and non-IoT devices. So IoT uses 4.0 Bluetooth connection, while non-IoT uses Bluetooth Classic. So what's the difference? Well, Bluetooth Classic is used for products that typically needs continuous data streaming over, such as like our wireless earphones and mouse, which usually require a higher data transfer rate and a higher latency rate when sending data over. On the other hand, Bluetooth 4.0, also known as BLE, uses a low data transfer rate and has a lower latency when sending data over, and are used usually when they require infrequent data transfer. They need to operate on low power consumption for long hours. So as mentioned earlier, Bluetooth 4.0, which is also known as BLE or Bluetooth Smarts, are used in healthcare, entertainment, and fitness industry due to the compatibility supported by most and major operating systems like Android and iOS. And there are also different forms of how our Bluetooth connections are made, mainly a piconet and a scatternet, where a piconet can have a one-to-one and one-to-many connections, while a scatternet can have many-to-many connections. So Bluetooth 4.0 actually operates on the 2.4 GHz ISM band with 40 channels to enable hops at 1,600 hops per second, and this ability to frequency hop reduces both jamming and interference in crowded environments with other radio waves. And most importantly, it minimizes eavesdropping from attackers to get into the network with the rapidly changing frequencies.
So now I'll be talking about the Bluetooth protocol stack, their layers and what they do. In the interest of time, I'll only be covering specific layers, but you can pause the video to find out more about each layer. The BLE protocol stack is split into two main parts, the controller, which covers the lower layers, and the host, which covers the upper layers. So firstly, we have the physical layer, which carries out the frequency hopping, which was mentioned by Clement earlier. Next, we have the link layer, the HCI layer, and in the host, we have the L2 cap, the ATT, which allows devices to expose certain pieces of data to another device, such as packets, which are sent during the pairing process. We have the SM, which defines the methods for pairing and key distributions, the GATT, and the GAP, which directly interfaces with the app, handles device discovery and connection-related services. It also handles the initiation of security features. So now I'll be talking about the connection process. So the advertiser advertises with a specific data, letting any initiating device know that it is a connectable device. The scanner receives the advertisement and sends a scan request to the advertiser, and the advertiser responds with a scan response. This process is known as the device discovery process. The scanning device is aware of the advertiser and can initiate the connection. So the initiator specifies a peer device address to which to connect. If an advertisement received matches that address, the initiator sends a request to establish a connection with the advertiser. When a connection is formed, the device functions as a slave if the advertiser and a master if the initiator. Slave connects to one master, while a master can connect to many slaves.
So now I'll be going through the pairing process. In BLE pairing process, there are three main phases. In the first phase, this is where two devices will exchange their pairing features. So device A will initiate a Bluetooth device connection and send a pairing request packet to device B via the ATT protocol layer. So these two devices will exchange pairing information through a pairing request and a pairing response packet. So in this diagram, we can observe an example of a pairing request packet. So today we'll just look at some important features of a typical request packet. So the second column code here represents a basic description of the packet. The third column, I/O capacity, represents what is the input and output capacity of the Bluetooth device. Like for example, the device only supports keyboard only. The OOB column here represents an alternate method of communication when both devices have no user interface. The MITM column indicates whether the device requires man-in-the-middle attack protection. And most importantly, the SC column here indicates whether the device supports secure connection. So with all this information, they can now decide which pairing mechanism and which pairing method to use for subsequent phases. So in phase 2, they'll decide which pairing mechanism and which key pairing methods to use. So I'll be explaining these terms later, but for now in phase 2, there are three main steps. So firstly, they have to choose either the legacy pairing method or secure connection. And secondly, based on the first step and the key pairing matrix, they will choose the most appropriate key pairing method for them. And lastly, they can start pairing. So firstly, how do they choose which pairing mechanism to choose from? So as mentioned earlier in the response packet, if both devices indicate 1 in the SE column, it means that secure connection will be supported on both devices and it will be used. Otherwise, if one of the devices is unable to support secure connection, legacy pairing will be used instead. And according to this pairing mechanism chosen, they'll have a list of key pairing methods that is available to them. So as shown in the table, Bluetooth secure connections have an additional key pairing method, which is numeric comparison. So what are the key pairing methods? So key pairing methods are ways that two devices can authenticate themselves. So they are used to generate keys that will be used to encrypt and establish secure connections. So for just words, as the name suggests, it just works, and therefore there is no authentication. In passkey, one device will generate a 6-digit passkey, and it will require the other user to enter the same 6-digit passkey into their device. And out of band is different from a typical Bluetooth protocol, like for example a near field communication, which is used in most e-payments like Google Pay, where you tap your phone to delegate the transmission of data. Whereas the numeric comparison means both users are shown 6 digits, so they must both enter yes on their phones or devices if both numbers are the same. So the question now is, how do they determine which is the best key pairing methods available to them? So in BLE, they have a key pairing matrix. So this key pairing matrix will be used to decide which key pairing methods are the most appropriate to them. So as shown in the left diagram, they will first check the OOB column in the request packet shown earlier. So if both are not set, they will check the MITM column. So looking at the bottom right of this matrix, if one device mentioned that they require MITM protection, they will refer to the input or output capabilities table on the right. So now for example, if both devices have only display capabilities, according to this matrix, they will use the just words key pairing method. So now the device has decided which key pairing method to use and which key pairing mechanism to use. I'll now talk about the high level overview of the pairing process. So in this example, we will imagine that the legacy pairing and the passkey pairing method was chosen. So let's say two devices pairs for the first time. A temporary 128-bit key, TK, is generated from the 6-digit passkey that is generated from the initiator's device. So when the respondent keys in the same 6-digit passkey, it will also generate the exact same TK. So these two devices will exchange random values and generate a STK, short-term key, based on these random values and the initial TK. So therefore, if the initial authentication was successful, the STK generated by these two devices will eventually be the same. So this STK will be used to encrypt and establish a secure channel where other keys such as the LTK, CSRK, IRK can be distributed for further communication. So just to explain, the LTK here represents a long-term key. It represents a persistent key that is stored in both devices, and this key will be used for future encryptions. IRK represents the identity resolving key. It represents the device identity. CSRK represents the connection signature resolving key. It is used to sign data at the ATT layer, which is used as a form of authentication as well. But however, in secure connections, no STK is generated at all. After authentication is successful, the LTK long-term key is directly generated using a much more complex AES-CMAC encryption, where public and private keys are used as well. So the LTK is then used to encrypt and establish a secure channel. So this LTK will then be stored locally by each device. But last but not least, in phase 3 of the pairing process, specific keys are transported to one another. So once the connection is encrypted using the STK or the LTK, the device will then generate and distribute secret keys such as the LTK, IRK, CSRK as mentioned earlier. So these keys are also added to each device trusted database, which is then used to build whitelists for future transactions. So now I'll be passing on my time to Swilling, where she will elaborate more about the Bluetooth vulnerabilities.
I will now bring you through security vulnerabilities and attacks. There are three main security issues with pairing in BLE. First is the man-in-the-middle attack, whereby a third device impersonates the other two legitimate devices in order to fool these devices into connecting to it. The malicious device can intercept data, inject false data into the communication, or remove data before it reaches its intended recipient. Next is passive eavesdropping, whereby the third device listens in to data being exchanged between two paired devices. Lastly, identity tracking, whereby a malicious entity associates address of BLE device with a specific user, then physically tracks the user based on the presence of the BLE device. Now let's talk about Bluetooth for our case study. Bluetooth is a high-severity Bluetooth vulnerability which was recently discovered by researchers last September. It enables an unauthenticated attacker within wireless range to eavesdrop or alter communications between paired devices. This issue exists in the pairing process called cross-transport key derivation for Bluetooth 4.0 to 5.0 implementations. For a device to be vulnerable, it must support both transport types BT and BLE. CTKD is utilized when two dual-mode devices are paired. A device must also permit pairing to proceed transparently with no authentication or weak key strength on at least one of the transport types. This allows the attacker to impersonate the previously paired device, enabling non-authenticated encryption keys to replace authenticated keys. If the existing key is overwritten by the key derived using CTKD, a man-in-the-middle attack can happen. To understand how key override can take place, we'll need to understand how CTKD works. CTKD is used because the issue of pairing the same two devices twice is not user-friendly. CTKD enables two devices to pair once, either over BT or BLE. A long-term key for BT can be derived from a long-term key which has already been shared when the two devices paired over BLE. This can happen both ways, BT key derived from BLE key or BLE key derived from BT key. Generally, a 128-bit key and two 4-byte strings are passed into the CTKD function using AES-CMAC, which is a form of AES encryption, to output a 128-bit key. Putting this into specific context, to derive a BLE key, a BT key and two fixed strings are used as inputs. To derive a BT key, a BLE key and another two fixed strings are used as inputs. As the Bluetooth standard defines constant strings and no fresh nonsense as inputs, the CTKD function derives the same output key if the same input key is reused. This is deterministic. Assuming there is no attack, this is how the CTKD pairing process is like. After Alice and Bob discover each other, the pairing phase is initiated. Pairing can happen over BT or BLE. First pairing key is derived from inputs such as Bluetooth addresses and fresh nonsense. Association phase is then completed. For example, if numeric comparison is used as an association mechanism, user needs to confirm if he sees the same numeric sequences on the pairing devices. Finally, CTKD is used to derive the second pairing key. CTKD can be exploited due to these two properties. CTKD does not enforce the chosen association mechanism, so this means that if the devices use numeric comparison, CTKD does not require them to pair through the same association mechanism. An attacker can choose to pair over a weaker mechanism called just works association. The second property is if there is an existing key, a newly generated key will override the existing key. This means an attacker impersonating either device can use CTKD to override the existing key. Now let's look at how key overrides occur in impersonation of master and slave scenarios respectively. Alice the master and Bob the slave runs a secure BT session and has a shared BT key. Due to CTKD, Alice and Bob are also pairable on BLE. Charlie the attacker wants to impersonate Alice and take over Alice's BT session. He does so by using Alice's Bluetooth address and JustWorks association to send a BLE pairing request to Bob. JustWorks is needed because the attacker doesn't need to authenticate himself. Bob then sends Charlie a BLE pairing response, believing that Alice wants to pair over BLE using CTKD. Charlie and Bob uses the exchange public keys to compute a value DK, which is then used as one of the inputs to compute the BLE key. The BT key is then locally computed from the BLE key using CTKD function. Charlie overrides the BT key that Bob established with Alice with his newly computed BT key. A BLE key has been established with Bob and Charlie successfully takes over Alice's BT session. For slave impersonation, Charlie wants to take over Bob's BT session by impersonating Bob. He does so when a secure BT session between Alice and Bob is interrupted, for example by running master impersonation attack beforehand. Then Charlie sends a BT pairing request to Alice using Bob's Bluetooth address and JustWorks association. Alice then sends a BT pairing response believing that Bob wants to re-pair over BT using CTKD. Charlie and Alice uses the exchange public keys to compute the value DK, which is then used as one of the inputs to compute the BT key. The BLE key is then locally computed from the BT key using CTKD function. Charlie overrides the BT key that Alice established with Bob with his newly computed BT key. A BLE key is established with Alice, and Charlie successfully takes over Bob's BT session. At the end of these two attacks, Charlie has overwritten Alice and Bob's BT keys. He can mutually authenticate with Alice and Bob using a message authentication code function with the appropriate key and inputs which are known to Charlie. Alice and Bob will then establish a so-called secure BT session with Charlie in the middle. Charlie will be able to get access to all traffic exchanged by Alice and Bob and can modify and inject arbitrary traffic between Alice and Bob. Hence, confidentiality and integrity are compromised. Restrictions have been mandated in the later Bluetooth versions 5.1 and later. Such restrictions prevent the override of authenticated key, key of given length with unauthenticated key, and key of reduced length.
So I will be going through the key takeaways from our presentation, and I hope you can remember these important points. Firstly, Bluetooth is only as strong as the weakest link. Secure authentication can only be achieved if both versions support secure connection. If one device supports secure connection while the other doesn't, the connection between the two will be legacy pair instead, which is not a secure connection, as attackers can brute force to obtain the key used for pairing, making the connection process vulnerable. Next, key pairing methods depends on the key pairing metrics. This means that end users are not able to choose the key pairing methods they want. As much as we agree that passkey entry establish a more secure connection and it just works, it ultimately depends on the key pairing metrics. Certain devices do not have an interface for end user to enter the passcode, which is why those devices are limited to using the just work pairing method. Lastly, through our case study earlier, we learned that even Bluetooth at higher versions are susceptible to attacks. It doesn't necessarily mean that Bluetooth at a higher version are completely safe and secure for any attacks. As we saw earlier, the Bluetooth issue exists in the pairing process for higher versions of Bluetooth implementation due to the CTKD function, which makes the device vulnerable and eventually leads to a man-in-the-middle attack. We can properly secure Bluetooth-enabled devices by educating end users. First, switch off Bluetooth when not in use. Just like how you stop many cyber attacks by not connecting to the cyber world, you can minimize any Bluetooth attacks if you switch off your Bluetooth when not in use. Next, always keep your devices updated. Bluetooth vulnerabilities might have been discovered and fixed via a software update as the algorithms or security mechanism are changed to ensure a more secure Bluetooth connection. In fact, for the earlier case study, it was recommended that we update our device to stop any Bluetooth issues from occurring, as the latest version of Bluetooth has already taken care of the issue. As such, Bluetooth users should always install the latest recommended updates. Lastly, users should only enable discoverable mode when pairing. Users should immediately disable the discoverable mode after pairing to prevent attackers from even having a chance to intercept the Bluetooth connection process. Our group would also like to recommend 2 applications that will be helpful in securing your Bluetooth-enabled device, and that includes your smartphone. The first app is a Bluetooth firewall. A Bluetooth firewall guards your device from any Bluetooth hacking and ensures privacy protection. This app runs as a background service which sends you any notifications on Bluetooth activities. As such, in the case of your smartphone, you will be able to see any Bluetooth activities that is taking place and take the necessary action if you feel that any of these activities seem suspicious. The second app is Bluetooth File Transfer. This app only allows authorized device to connect. It keeps private documents secure through AES encryption by using a long password to protect it, which ensures confidentiality. Only authorized devices that know the password to this document will be able to open this particular document as well as connect to the device.
And lastly, despite many patches to address the vulnerabilities, there are still many open problems like the strand2 vulnerability, where key size passed in the request packet may be subjected to buffer overflow. So according to researchers, such problems has already affected many end users' products.
And with that, I hope you've learned something from our presentation, and thank you for your time.